Hello everyone, welcome back to the class. So in previous weeks, we have already seen a lot of discussion about what is Chinese food, what is the Chinese food in Chinese people's eyes, and what is Chinese food in American people's eyes. And also we saw a lot of discussion about what actually do Chinese people love about Chinese food. And now finally we are entering a new unit which is about how to make Chinese food. So in this unit, we are going to read a lot of Chinese recipes and also the book about Chinese recipes. So the book for this week is titled The Way of Eating, which is written by a literatus living in the 18th century China. So we are going to see what's his idea about Chinese food and how to make Chinese food, and how these kind of ideas still lingers around in contemporary China and our contemporary society. And if you have any interest, you can recreate the dishes from this book and from the recipe we are going to read next week. And that will be a very good practice as well. Okay, so first a little bit about the author. The author is named Yuan Mei, who is a literatus living from 1716 to 1797. This is a picture of him. And he actually lives in the Hai Qing period. When we're talking about Hai Qing period, we are saying that's the golden days of the last dynasty of the pre-modern China. So actually he lived in a pretty good time where every material sources is rich and abundant, and the society is pretty energetic. So everything is supposed to be good in his own time. And he passed the imperial examination, which means he knows a lot about Confucian classics and dedicated himself to studying for a long time. And he eventually gained a position but quitted at the age of 38, which is a pretty unusual choice for literatus living in the 18th century China. Because passing the examination and get a position is every scholar's dream. But Yuan Mei is just a so extraordinary person. Because he found maybe that position is not suitable for him, he's not interested in doing all of those kind of bureaucratic political related thing, and he has a lot of dissatisfaction with it, so he decided to quit at a pretty young age, 38. After quitting the job, he began to live in his own garden named the Garden of Sui, or literally translated Garden of Contentment. The idea of contentment is pretty interesting. Actually, the Chinese title of this book, The Way of Eating, is 随缘食单. So literally translated is the recipe from the Garden of Sui, or the recipe from the Garden of Contentment. So when reading this recipe, you can find for yourself which part kind of represent the idea of contentment and how this idea is important in Yuan Mei's writing. So we can see Yuan Mei pass exam, get a job, and quit the job, and live in his own garden. Basically, he lived in a pretty unruly lifestyle, and he is considered a political liberty. Also, one thing very interesting about him is that he appreciated talent women and also recruited a lot of female students, which is again very unusual in the pre-modern time, because women in the pre-modern China are considered like not the good material to do scholarship, because women are expected to be a good mother and a good daughter, a good wife. So the evaluation system for women is to do good embroidery works or can keep the household pretty clean and things like that. But Yuan Mei goes against that, and he recruited a lot of female students and teach them how to write poem, how to write essay or things like that. It is pretty fitting for Yuan Mei being such an extraordinary person and leading an unruly lifestyle. And I think all these kind of characteristics influences his idea about food as well, about his obsession about food, his particular attention paid to the detail of the food. And you're going to see when reading the materials. So as I said, the Chinese title is 随园食单. So basically recipe from the Sweet Garden. But the English translation is the way of eating. And I think that's very interesting for the English translation to use the word the way. Because if you ever heard of Taoism, that kind of religion dealing with the relationship between yin and yang, you will know the idea about Tao, the Tao in the Taoism, that particular character is in a lot of cases translated as the way. So, and not only in the Taoist religion, but also in Confucianism, the way refers to the principle. In Taoism, it refers to the principle, but the principle is guided by the nature. And also, basically, the Tao, in a general sense, refers to something come from the heaven, come from a superior power that casts down to the human society, or lead the principle, lead the actual route of the human society. So that kind of idea is now used to translate the title of the book. And it kind of have that connotation. If we say the way of eating, we imply that eating as an action is not only a natural kind of way of consuming something of nutrient your body and live, but also has something more abstract and more intellectually it has some kind of intellectual guide that provided by the heaven, by the deity, or by the superior power, and we need to follow that guide to eat. So I think that idea is very interesting and kind of elevate the status of eating. So again, because it's a recipe, it's talking about food. And I think we can consider food as something that makes a connection between human and nature, between human society and the heavenly principle. So food is a very interesting thing if you think in this way, that connects everything. So maybe that is why Yuan Mei is so obsessed about food. And that is why we have dedicated such one semester to the idea about food and Chinese food. So the assigned part for this week is first the preface, which basically talking about the theoretical and personal origin of this book. And second, the essential knowledge, which discuss about the principles you need to follow when making Chinese dishes. And thirdly, is pretty interesting. It's called objectables, which is the pitfalls of making Chinese dishes or eating Chinese food. So basically, these things you shouldn't do when you're making Chinese food, or these things you shouldn't do when you're eating Chinese food. So you can see they actually theorizes the eating and Chinese food and make it like a complete theory. And I think this idea is very interesting. That is why I want you to begin with a preface and with the principles. But you may ask, if this is a recipe, where is the actual recipe? So the recipe part we are going to read on Friday in class. So there's a lot of recipes included in 随园食单 in the way of eating, and categorized pretty neatly by materials, like how to make seafood, how to make beef, how to make chicken, and we are going to see more later in class. So I want to share with you some very interesting passages I didn't assign, but I think it's very interesting and very closely connected to the idea about staple food in A Bite of China. So there is one passage in this way of eating called Rice and Koji. And he said, Koji and rice are the foundations of a meal, and all accompanying dishes are extra. And it is only through solid knowledge of the foundation that one can begin to walk the way. So you can see the tone of the writing is pretty much follow the idea of there's a principle we need to follow. There's something guide our eating and guide our way of making food. So we need to first identify what is foundation and then know the foundation to walk the way. He continues, one frequently sees wealthy families who are quite discerning over the quality of their dishes but are not their rice. In pursuing trifles and forgetting their foundations, they are quite worthy of ridicule. I do not enjoy lending soup over rice since it robs the rice of its origin flavor. If I must do so, I would rather pour on tea or hot water, which would not deprive the rice of its true flavor. The sweetness of the rice is superior to 100 other flavors. When a connoisseur is served good rice, they can appreciate it without needing any dishes on the side. Again, it's talking about what is foundation, and the idea about true flavor is also very interesting. Because if you say true flavor, then there must be fake flavor. So there's actually a value judgment behind the idea about flavor as well. So Yuan Mei pointed out here, there is a correct way you need to eat rice. There is something correct things you need to care about rice, and then you can understand the true flavor. And lastly, he said, recently there has been people making dark koji by adding pumpkin meat or making 8 treasure koji by adding the fruits and nuts, all of which causes the koji to lose its proper flavor. So you can see he is such an interesting person. So Yuan Mei is such an interesting person. He has a strong kind of preference. He loves certain things and consider other things not the orthodox or not the true way of eating. And I think we can have a discussion about whether you agree with him or you find it pretty interesting or counterintuitive. Lastly, I think this idea about time is very interesting, especially when you're talking about making food and especially making Chinese food. So I think we have a lot of discussion about how much effort you should put into making Chinese food and how much time you should dedicate it into like making soy sauce, like in Li Ziqi's video. But now, Yuan Mei also has some very excellent sentence about the time in food, in making food. He said, Master Yin Wu Duan stated, it is preferable that people wait for koji than let koji wait for them. This sentence is very poetic in a way that it treated koji, treated the food as people as well. So both koji, both food and people has their intention. And if you are going to enjoy the best of the food, you should wait for it. You should be patient. You should invest yourself into that process rather than treat the koji as an object you need to just take for granted or you can just consume it. So you won't let the koji wait for you. This poetic sentence has its kind of practical use as well. That means we need to cook as long as needed to make a good koji. But to write it in this way and to record it in a recipe book kind of assigned more meanings into the idea about how to understand time and what kind of significance of time in cooking Chinese food. Okay. So that's about it, and I hope you enjoy the reading. Don't forget to leave a comments down below, and I will see you on Wednesday. Okay. Bye.